Good day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my office. Today I gave a presentation over specs grading to several of my colleagues and, well, the PowerPoint file's already created. I might as well share it with you all as well. So, as all good presentations start, we've got ourselves a title. And then, typically, we've got ourselves a, why do I care about this? What got me interested in this kind of thing? Usually as a second slide. And of course, I've got that second slide. So specs grading, of course, is an alternative way of doing grading, a slightly different way of structuring things. And if you've seen my video on alternative ways of doing grading and rethinking grading, you will be at least somewhat familiar with this. And this is going to dive a little bit deeper. Well, I jumped into this after seeing a particular C&E news article, or Chemical and Engineering News. And that was on specs grading. Like, this sounds like a really interesting idea. This is really promising. So I got the book. And, obviously there's been more books published on the topic than this one by Linda B. Nilson, looking at the slides. But this is kind of the current de facto, this is specs grading book. So of course, as book recommendations go, that's the book recommendation. As you've noticed from some of my earlier videos, specifically one earlier video, I was at the biannual conference on chemical education. And one of the major themes for that conference was alternative grading, specifically specs grading. Basically, that C&E news article really kind of lit a fire in the chem ed community. So, of course, I went to workshops after workshops on this. The first workshop I went to was just packed. It wasn't actually a workshop, it was a seminar, so, people talking, not actually interacting other than a few questions. But that was, the first one of the day. They didn't pick a big enough room, kind of thing. That thing was packed. So a lot of what's in this PowerPoint presentation slash this video really comes from what I learned at BCCE 2022. There was also a great workshop from some folks from Gwinnett County, Georgia that I attended. Really good. They're doing a lot of specs grading in their chemistry classes. Once again, learned a lot, and that's what I'm sharing here. Okay, so why are we doing specs grading? Kind of what's the goals here of this? And there's kind of four goals. First is to increase rigor. Let's just be honest. College grades have been going up. Skill of college graduates has not been. So we kind of want to make sure grades reflect skill. Also, this kind of pairs into, and part of the impetus to doing this, the reason why I and my colleagues got chatting about this is we started a dual enrollment program with a pharmacy school. Dual enrollment's the wrong word, that's usually with the high school. But we started a program where you take 3 years at my school, then you go to the pharmacy school, get your PharmD, and you get your bachelor's from my school at the same time. Decent deal. If you're going in to be a pharmacist, it's a nice idea. Well, we're talking with them, and they're doing a version of specs grading known as mastery grading, which I'll be talking about here in a little bit. And the idea here is you've got these skills you have to learn, and if you don't learn them, you don't become a pharmacist. You don't pass that class. And so we're like, okay, that sounds like an interesting approach. And they're like, wait, I just saw a conference on this. So it's kind of more of why I'm doing this. But the idea here is you're increasing rigor. Second, you want to increase transparency. So this way the students know what's going on. And specs grading is generally meant to be incredibly obvious of what's going on. There's no pop quizzes in specs grading. At least not in anything vaguely resembling what's normally done with this. The others are things you want to decrease. Specifically, grading time. As student enrollment gets up and as you're doing more and more engaging activities, grading can start adding on very easily. If you do a midterm and a final and both of them are multiple choice and you're just scanning a Scantron, you can grade that super fast. That takes minutes to grade tons. But that's also not exactly the most pedagogically prudent approach. So if you're trying to do much more student-centric, much more just better pedagogy, you're going to spend a lot of time grading. And so it actually gets to the point where grading becomes a serious hindrance. One of the folks at the conference was talking about spending hours at grading, and to the point where it was becoming a serious work-life balance issue for them. So we want to decrease the amount we're grading. And specs grading can do that. It can also lead into a trap. So depending on how you do it, it doesn't always succeed. But, and I'll get into how it does that. It's by how you do the actual grading itself. Is the goal is to be able to do it quicker so that you have more work-life balance so you can prepare for classes better / go home and be with your family. Also, you want to reduce the amount of stress per individual assignment that's created. Things are evolving. I've talked about some of my old classes. I had like one that was a midterm and a final. Of course, that's kind of normal in the UK from my understanding. I don't know, I've never been there, but for most American students, that would be insanely stressful, and that would really be adversely affecting them. When I was teaching out west, I was at a community college, and I'm still learning to teach. This was my 3rd year teaching. I created a series of tests that were basically, okay, the first topic that we covered in that unit, easy question, medium question, hard question. Next topic we covered in the unit, easy question, medium question, hard question. Next topic, easy question, medium question, hard question. What I discovered the grades were good, okay, bad, 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 bad. Once they did a hard question, a lot of the students who weren't really good, those students who could really had mastery, they were fine. But those students who were struggling, once they did the hard question, it just went downhill because they were not in an emotional position really to do further questions after trying to struggle with that hard question. So I quickly learned you don't do easy, medium, hard, easy, medium, hard. You do easy, 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 medium, 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 hard, hard, hard. That way, if they do get burned out, well, at least they got burned out at the end. Well, that's not ideal either. You don't want them to get burned out. So the goal here is going to be several small assessments that are less stressful for the students. They're not thinking, oh no, I have to do well on this assessment or my life is ruined. Whereas if you've got a couple of large tests, if it's 15% of your grade, that's a letter grade and a half. If you bomb that thing hardcore, you can easily lose a letter grade in the class, which is bad. It's really bad if you're currently studying at a mid-C. Lose a letter grade and you're no longer passing. So kind of how we jump into this, but before I do so, I got a couple of disclaimers I need to give. First disclaimer is that specifications grading, or specs grading, is really a family of grading styles. There are several of them that I'll be talking about. They're all kind of in the specs grading family. Second disclaimer is the terminology around this is evolving rather rapidly and is not uniform. So what I'm calling specs grading and what I'm going to call mastering grading may not be what other people call. Some people will call specs grading mastering grading, and that's perfectly fine, and they may have other terminologies, etc. So the terminologies I'm using are the ones that work best for me, that I think fit into the general context, but one educator from another may use different terminology for the same thing, or may use the same terminology for different things. So just be forewarned, the terminology here has not settled in. There's no real strict definitions yet. This is all evolving rapidly. Third disclaimer, specs grading, like really any other pedagogical approach, is going to work better for some classes than others. And don't think it will work for all your courses. Don't think it's the best for all your courses. And if it doesn't work on one course, it doesn't mean it won't work on another one. So kind of standard disclaimer here, different pedagogies work better and worse for different settings and different contexts. Okay, so core aspects of specs grading, kind of, what's the generally thematic within, the families that we're going to call specs grading. First is that the assessments are going to be very, very transparent. The students are going to know what they're going to be seeing. When I'm doing, a specs grading quiz, it's going to have a question very similar to what we worked on the board. So there's no surprises. They know when it's coming. They know what's going to cover. There's no surprises on this one. Once again, this can evolve a bit. This is an evolving topic. But in general, we're looking at no surprises here. The student still has to do the work, but they know what kind of work they're going to get themselves into on any particular given day. Each assessment is going to be very narrowly focused. They're going to target one learning objective. Now, depending on which version you're dealing with is how broad or narrow that learning objective is. In some versions, this is a very, very narrow learning objective. So as a chemist, it might be something like doing dimensional analysis using one step to find mass with density. Other versions that you're going to see more often are going to be something like be able to use dimensional analysis and just kind of leave it at that. So a much more broad learning objective. Your question is going to be a little bit more diversified, and you're going to have significantly fewer of these learning objectives. So a little bit of a spread, but you've still got one learning objective, whatever that happens to be. I've got a couple of the assessments that kind of cross learning objectives. I didn't really target them in, but for the most part, you're dealing with things that target a learning objective. And as such, since they're only targeting one learning objective, they're going to be relatively small. When I do my specs grading assessments, they're usually on half sheets of paper, maximum 5 questions. These things are small. They're not meant to take more than 5 to 10 minutes, probably even not that. To be honest, giving the students 15 minutes is pretty full-on universal design. You've given you way too much time. You need to do this. They do vary. 15 minutes for a limiting reagent question. Okay, that actually seems much more reasonable. Maybe you need to go a little bit further. But these are relatively small assessments. These are not meant to be major. Once again, this is going into lower stress. You're doing several of them. They're relatively small. This is trying to grade on mastery of content, not on emotional rigor or grit. The next commonality, and this is one of the key commonalities for most versions of specs grading, is that of all or nothing grading. This is where the rigor and the grading efficiency come in. You grade the grades, or you grade the assessments as right or wrong. There is no partial credit. When you're grading these things, you spend most of your time grading partial credit. You're not going to do that. So this is going to speed things up. I have found I can actually grade the assessments faster than I can enter them into my learning management system. That's the slow step with doing specs grading. Now, this is all or nothing grading. Here's the caveat. That would be brutal if you just did that. So here's a quiz. It's all or nothing, right or wrong, no partial credit. Which if you think about it, if you build half a bridge, it doesn't help anyone. You're not going to get partial credit in the future. But that would be brutal for someone who's learning. This is the first time they've done something and they get it wrong even a little bit. They get it all wrong. They don't get any credit for doing at least something right. So paired with this all or nothing grading is the ability to do repeat assessments, to do it over again. So hey, you tried it on try 1, you failed. You may have failed by a little or you failed by a lot. Either way, you failed. But you can get it again on try 2. There's no penalty for getting it again on try 2. So if you got it on the second try, perfect, you got it. You fail on try 2, maybe you go to try 3. Now at a certain point, you start running into serious diminishing returns. So depends on what you're doing. You may not want to give students unlimited assessment retake opportunities. That's going to increase your grading issue. And one of my colleagues who was using a form of specs grading, they ran into the problem of if they gave something like 10 attempts on an assignment, even though it was very quick to grade one assessment, doing it 10 times did take quite a while, and that was creating some issues for grading. Now, these could be either in class, they could be out of class, it could be some kind of hybrid. Once again, there's a lot of different ways of doing this, and it's a fairly diverse set of approaches. So you've got options. I typically do a quiz-based system. You don't have to do a quiz-based system. There's multiple ways of assessing. Okay, so looking at the specs grading family, you've got what's typically just referred to as specs grading, kind of the core. There's standards-based grading, which I'll get to in a couple of slides, which is kind of a modification of specs grading. Mastery grading, which is really a modification of how you're going to put that into the grade book. It's a fairly drastic modification. And then there is, and I'm going to have to look at the paper for this, EMRN. I cannot get that. There's no, well, there's a vowel, but it's not pronounceable. EMRN Grading. It stands for Excellent Mastery Revision Not Accessible. So, like they didn't turn it in, or they turned in a copy you just couldn't grade. That's a modification to the all or nothing version. So it's more of specs adjacent. So I'll get to that on its own slide towards the end. That matches really a different set of assessments. Okay, so for the classic specs grading approach, what you're looking at is probably setting up about 20 learning objectives. Maybe 10, maybe 30, but something around 20. Something where you can do about 1 a week, maybe 2 a week, that kind of thing. Probably more like 2 a week, but then take a week or 2 off, depending on where it's at. So this way you've got a reasonable number of them, but not a swarm of them. Each assessment targets one learning objective, kind of as I mentioned earlier. These could be a whole multitude of things. They could be in-class assignments, some kind of quiz or activity. They could be out-of-class assignments, online homework. If you're familiar with ALEX, yay, I got Alex right. I have to always look on that one. If you're familiar with Alex, that's what that is, basically. It's a version of specs grading. Whatever works for your class. You can do this kind of in whatever format that works for you. I typically do some quizzes, and by the way, I say I typically, I've done this twice. I did this last spring and I'm doing this now, kind of thing. So, take that with a grain of salt. But you're going to have one learning objective, assess that however you'd like, but you've got to give them repeat opportunities. You can't just do it one and done because of the all or nothing grading. That would, once again, be incredibly brutal. Okay, so once again, all or nothing grading, grade them. Either they have to be perfect or they have to be good enough. Once again, this is up to you. If you're thinking, well, if they made a typo, if they got a number and they put 469 where it should have been 496, for me, I would probably be like, if it's clear that's what they did, I'd give them the credit anyhow. For you, depends on what you're doing. Maybe that's good enough. Maybe that's not good enough. Are they off by a sig fig or two? Maybe that's good enough. Maybe that's not good enough. That's up to you on what is good enough to get the credit. But still, it's all or nothing. Then students typically are going to get about 2 to 4 attempts. Once you go beyond about 3 or 4, you start hitting diminishing returns and you start getting a lot of work for yourself. But you need at least 2 attempts. And I've personally found when I did it in the spring, 2 attempts, maybe it should be 3 kind of thing. A 3rd attempt really does help things out a little bit. Now, this does have a distinct advantage. Student misses an assignment. They weren't there that day because whatever. Oh, well, there's 1 of your attempts down. You still got 2 more. Cuts drama like crazy. One standard pro tip I've heard that I use a lot is, give 4 tests, drop 1. Cuts back on drama. This way, you're doing this beyond just give 4, drop 1. You're going much more. Now, you don't have to give every assignment 2 to 4 reattempts. So there are some modified versions. One's called a token system. I don't like the idea of the token system because there's no tokens, but the concept is students have X number of reattempts split amongst all their assignments so they can spin them how they see fit. I don't like the kind of slight gamification going on over here, but I kind of see what's going on. So the idea would be, let's say a student has 5 reattempts. So you've got 20 assignments. You can either repeat 1 5 times, or you can repeat 5 of them once. But then the student may very well have the ability to earn more repeats. So do an extra credit assignment, do a reworking, showing how it should be done, with open book or something, or an explanation of why they got the wrong answer, where they went wrong. Something else pedagogically valuable that they then use that to earn the reattempt. So you're not just letting them reattempt randomly, and you're discouraging them from just, stabbing in the dark and getting it wrong, and it doesn't help anyone if they just don't try. So this way, you put a little bit more weight on it, where if they get it right, they don't have to do the extra credit thing, or they don't have to worry about that one, and they can, save their reattempts for later. So there's a couple of alternative approaches for that. Also, if you need to, encourage students to do some random thing like judge at a science fair, hey, this is easy extra credit that's not actually extra credit. So that helps out a fair amount too. Okay, so specs grading, how do you incorporate this in the grade? So you got some options. What I've done is simply said, this is a quiz. It's going in the grade just like any other quiz. I've got maybe 19 of them. Each one will be 1% of the final grade. Or maybe I have 10 of them or something. Fairly straightforward. That's the easiest way of doing this. Some folks like myself have gone fairly conservative and done a little bit of this, maybe 10, 20% of the grade is specs grading. Everything else is kind of the normal stuff. You know, the homework, the tests, etc. I cut back some on the tests, made them a little smaller, replaced those with specs grading assessments. Or you could go full force, make that 100% of the grade, or make that all but the final. So you've got the final, and then 85, 90% of the class grade is the specs grading, and then there's the final for 10, 15%. That way you can keep your department happy if there's a minimum percentage for a final exam or a common final or something like that. I'm probably going to go more into specs grading in the future. We'll see how things go. But what you could also do is set up some kind of rubric where if the student, say, gets this many specs grading assignments, then that's this percentage that feeds into the grade calculations. If they get this many, it's this other percentage, so that the percents aren't actually percents. And the reason you would want to do this is now you could layer things. So you could have, basic ones, more advanced ones. So if the student gets all the basic ones but don't get the advanced ones, that's going to get a better grade than simply their percentage would suggest. So, if you want a 70%, you need to get the 5 basics and that's it. If you want an 80%, you need to get the 5 basics and 3 of the 5 advanced. And if you want to get a 9, you get the idea. Now, mastering grading will take this and run with this. And it'll just ditch the whole entering the grade book thing. And it's just like, if you want a C, this is what you have to pass. Now, moving on to standards grading. This is one that's seen in K-12. My prediction is it will not be seen in higher ed. At least I sure hope not. In this case, it's not very broad learning objectives. These are very, very specific learning objectives. This would be something like finding the mass of an object from its volume using density. Then the next learning objective would be finding volume from the mass of an object using density. Okay, so this is me from the future. The camera was having issues and some parts of the video just were not recorded. So this is me re-recording or just recording the parts that weren't recorded. So it appears the camera cut off when I was about mid-standards grading. So let me kind of continue on. You've got your, say, 200 learning objectives or whatever. The reason you have so many of these stupid learning objectives, and the reason they're so very specific, is that these are, for a K-12 educator, the state standards. So if your state standard is, students will be able to find density from mass and volume, and students will be able to find volume from density and mass, and students will be able to find mass from density and volume. Okay, you have 3 different learning objectives. You're probably going to have to document that to whatever regulatory body you're going to deal with. Okay, I'm not K-12. I've never done K-12. I have friends who've done K-12, so caveats on all of my description of K-12. But the idea is you got state standards, and your learning objectives are the state standards. There's a lot of state standards. If you've ever looked at the documents, there's a lot of them. And thus, you're documenting all of them. And basically, all you're doing is being completely transparent with the students. And you're saying, okay, this is what the state tells me you have to be able to do it. So here's the list. Let's go through, and once you get those done, we're going to check those off, and that's how we're going to get you a grade. So it's basically complete openness, a radical openness with the students on how grading happens. Kind of a cool idea. Now, on to mastery grading. So with mastery grading, the idea here is we're actually trying to address an issue with how grades are done in general. And that is, what is a B? So, an A or a near perfect A, that's understandable. The person can do everything. A D, they're just not capable. But what about a C and a B? What does that mean? Does that mean if you've got 10 learning objectives that they have reached, say, competency, but not much more in all 10 of them? They've got, their 70 to 85% or whatever. Or does that mean if you've got 10 learning objectives, they've got, say, 7 or 8 of them to complete mastery, and they can't do the other 2. They're completely incompetent in those 2 or 3. Well, that's a very different narrative. If, say, you're an airplane pilot, and you can do everything perfectly. You are the best of the best in everything, except for the fact you can't land the plane. I don't want you anywhere near a yoke because you can't land the plane. So that's a very different story. This kind of carries on to a lot of professional schools. So this is kind of taking over a lot of the med schools and the pharmacy school that I was talking about earlier, because you have to have at least competency in everything if you're going to be in these positions. You know, if you're a doctor, you don't know what you need to be doing, and if you have to do something you're completely incompetent with, that's going to be a problem. So yeah, for licensure reasons, this is important, and for just public safety reasons, this is important. So the way mastery grading does this is you break apart a series of learning objectives, and you say, okay, these learning objectives are essential. If you pass the class, you must be able to do these things. Otherwise, you're a danger to society, or you really should not be passing this class. Okay, so then you also have supplemental learning objectives. You might subdivide these into multiple types if you want, but either way, you've got learning objectives that you don't have to have. You should have, it would be good to have, but they're not essential. And then the grade structure for the course is, roughly speaking, you have, say, a C, you've got all the essential learning objectives, probably not very many of the supplemental, none or only a few supplemental learning objectives. So you've got the basics down. You're not going to endanger anyone. Then a B, you've got all the basics down, you've got some of the more advanced stuff that is good to have, but not necessarily essential. And an A, you've got basically everything down. And in this case, this gives a much more clear meaning of what an A, B, and C mean. And then, of course, D and F, you're probably retaking the class anyways. Now, with mastery grading, there are a few issues, and I'm pretty sure the camera actually caught that. So I will go back to me in the past. So now there is a catch with mastery grading. If you have those essential skills, you can run into a problem where a student does the skill, they do the assessment, they fail it, then they try it again, and now they've exceeded their attempts and they failed it. It's mid-September and they failed the course. That's not okay, so you need to do unlimited attempts for all essential skills. That way, they've got they're not done for before the class has even started, kind of thing. You don't want someone failing the course in early September for a fall class, kind of thing. Now, those need to be unlimited attempts. And the air quotes are because there's ways to limit these without limiting them. Let me explain. The classic example that was given was that students would be allowed to make one attempt on a subject per week. What you want to do is you want to stop the student from just guessing and just burning through attempts. Like, I didn't get it right this time, I didn't get it right this time, without focusing on actually learning how to do this. Which is a problem with some of the unlimited approaches where the student doesn't stop and go, okay, I failed 3 times, maybe I need to learn something instead of just keep trying the same thing over and over again. Maybe I need to get some help, maybe I need to do more learning approaches. So to discourage this, and make it so you're not trying to grade 50 assessments for one student, the approach is like, okay, you can reassess once a week. Now, all of a sudden, if the assessment was on, say, week 2, then presumably, 14 reassessments? 16-week semester, you got week 2, week 3, they take their first reassessment. That's still a ton, but you've now limited them down just by time. The fact that they can only do 1 per week. So there are limits on that one. So it wouldn't necessarily be unlimited, but it would be sort of unlimited. But you don't want to get into a situation where, once again, mid-September, the 5th week of class, they've failed. And there's no hope for them to pass. So you don't want to get in that situation. So you've got to give them unlimited attempts in doing essential learning objectives. Okay, so moving on to EMRN Grading. And I've got to look down for this one. So this stands for Excellent Mastery, Attempt or Redo, or Revise, depending on which you want to do. More of Revise, because these are going to be assessments. The students are probably not going to want to redo their assessments. They're probably going to want to revise. So think lab report, not quiz. Or essay, or something, a greater work. So anyways, excellent, mastery. you could have like an E star was seemed to be popular, where it was like, you revise this, minor mistakes can take it to an excellent, or if you don't succeed, it goes down to mastery, kind of an in-between revision needed, but you can still get to excellent. Then finally, revisions necessary. This would probably get something like a 50% or something, a failing grade, but not like a super failing grade. And then not accessible. For whatever reason, I can't grade this. This is so incomplete, I can't grade it. You didn't upload it, I can't grade it because you didn't turn the thing in. Or for whatever reason, it's just not gradable. And of course, that's a 0. So this gives you a little bit more fine gradation, but it's still very coarse gradation. So you're not doing, say, 75.3 versus 75.4. You're not trying to really narrow it in on this particular assessment. You're just kind of doing a very general, it's really good, it's okay, it's not good, I can't grade this. And running from there. And this is also, in kind of this general, very coarse assessments, and not having the 75 versus 76% kind of thing, this is also trying to increase consistency and general, more equitable grading by, is it right, is it wrong? There's no partial credit here to think about. Is it a little bit more right? Is the wording a little bit better, a little bit worse? Instead, is it either meets expectations, but barely? Does it really get to something that's good, or does it need to be revised? Or for the case of specs, master grading, did you get it right or did you get it wrong? So this adds a little bit more objectivity. You don't necessarily have the inherent precision of saying, is this paper 0.5% better than this other paper? Can you really make that assessment? But you can say, this paper is really good, this paper is okay. That's a much easier assessment going on. Okay, so this was, as I mentioned earlier, probably going to be used for larger assessments, things that redoing them isn't going to be such a good idea as revising them. So think papers and essays and whatnot. Now, you might want to limit those revisions. So you might want to say, okay, maybe if you get an M, you can't revise it. So you either go for excellent or you go for M for mastery. So if you don't get E star or E, you're not getting the E, you're not getting 100%. You might want to say that, okay, you can revise a mastery to an excellent, but you can't revise a revision needed to an excellent. So you maybe only can jump up one notch. Or you can only get excellent in your first or second revision. Because the idea here is you got several options to revise. And so maybe you're capped at, you have to get excellent by the second revision. So put some limitations so students don't feel that they can just turn in garbage and redo it, that they actually need to make a solid first attempt in order to get a good grade on this one. The ability to redo these assessments does come with the downside that students may feel that they don't have to try until the rubber actually meets the road kind of thing. And so now all of a sudden they're not trying to learn stuff, and then it's December of the fall semester, they've got a couple days left of class, and now they're trying to cram everything in, and they don't succeed. And you have to grade a bunch of junk. We don't want that. So you want some encouragements, like a limited number of attempts, or a limited ability to revise and get the top grade, that they encourage the students to do it right, if not the first time, at least the second or third time. So how do I use this? So I've got two classes I've tried so far, as I mentioned earlier, a Gen Chem class, which my school calls Chem 1211, and then a GOB Chem class. This is the first semester of a two-semester GOB Chem class, which my school calls Chem 1151. So I'll just let you read the slide, but basically 19 assignments on the first one, 9 on the second one. I didn't want to do as much revision. I've got a very full plate this semester, doing some overloads. So I wanted to tweak it. I wanted to dabble in this one a little bit, correct a few things I've learned from spring, but I did not want to overhaul that course because I got enough to do. I'm overhauling a different course anyhow. So it's like, for my sanity, I can't do everything. But basically, these are mostly quiz format. There is one that's not. I have my students do an Excel spreadsheet, and they actually have to graph something, and they have to use the equations in the Excel spreadsheet as part of their lab. And so instead of just grading them on that one time and done, they get to do that, and that's a specs grading assessment. So if their first spreadsheet worked well, they don't have to turn in other spreadsheets. If their first spreadsheet did not meet expectations, then they have to turn in a spreadsheet from a different lab, and they'll get 3 tries. So first try, the second lab, and then the third lab. I think it's a density lab, a specific heat lab, and a kinetics lab that they'll be doing. So the way I did repeat assessments, so they've got the first attempt, and how I do the second and third attempts is a little bit different than what I heard at the conference, although, once again, a bunch of people are doing different things. First assessment was mostly a quiz, except for that one Excel spreadsheet, which got uploaded, and that was done outside of class. So what I would do is have the assessment basically the day after we covered a topic. So if we covered ideal gas law on Tuesday, then on Thursday I would have an assessment on ideal gas law. That would be the first time. Then I still kept the unit tests. I didn't get rid of those. I would take the unit tests, I would shrink that down because I took out some of the bulk for the specs grading, and I kind of took out a lot of the hard to grade stuff, like the limiting reagent stuff, that kind of things. Took that out, made that part of specs grading, and then I replaced it by stapling the second attempt to the back of the test. So that was the Gen Chem back in the spring. Similar story for the GOB chemistry. However, there's kind of a second, either the student has to make an appointment during office hours, or maybe I give it, one on Thursday, and then the following Thursday I give it again, kind of thing. So I kind of build that in. I'm still kind of experimenting on how to do the third attempt. But stapling it to the test, if you're going to keep a test, has worked well. And basically tell the students, hey, they're back there. If you've already succeeded, just ignore them and leave them blank. If you have not, then you need to do that, and best of luck, kind of thing. That seems to have worked well. So results-wise, grading is much faster. I spend more time entering them into D12, which is my learning management system, than I do actually marking them, because it's right or wrong. There's no partial credit stuff. And I'm not sitting back going, okay, somebody else made this mistake. What did I give them? Okay, you know what? No, I'm going to go back through and edit. No, there's none of this. It's either right or it's wrong. Much, much faster. You would think that with 2 to 3 tries, everyone would get it right. No, that's not the case. I plotted course grade versus the number of specs grading assessments completed successfully, for the spring class in either the first or second try. So it was successful if they got it the first try or the second try. And it was linear. My IRB won't let me actually show that graph, but it was linear. So it was a really nice look to it. And definitely not everyone completed them. I had one student who completed successfully all of the skill checks. That student was amazing. Most students completed around half to 75% of them successfully. That also makes me think that I need to add in a third attempt, because that number is actually kind of low. The average was around half to 75%. That's kind of low. So I'm going to add in the third attempt. That's why I'm doing the third attempt now with my GOB course. Okay, further reading. The Specs Book by Linda B. Nilson. Okay, I think I pronounced that right. I am so sorry. If you're watching, I apologize. I'm butchering your name. It's specs grading and restoring rigor, motivating students, and saving faculty time. Good book. Standard review of a lot of these books. The first half is the real book. The second half is a bunch of examples, and not really that interesting, but mildly interesting. That said, I strongly recommend it. It really kind of set the stage for where I was going, and then, of course, the conference was really, really interesting. There's a lot of different ways of doing specs grading, a couple of different approaches. Faculty are doing things that meet their needs. And so this is one of the kind of take-homes is your class is your class. you want to customize it to be your class and what works best for your class and your students. But overall, I've had good luck. The students seem to like it. When I started doing active learning, I started doing POGIL, I got a ton of pushback from students. Found a few tricks to get rid of the pushback, but I got a ton of pushback. When I started doing this, I got no pushback. Students are used to the idea of a quiz. It's like, hey, we're having a quiz. Okay, that's fine. It's all or nothing grading. The student's like, oh. Oh, but you get 2 or 3 reattempts. Oh, okay. And so the students get fairly on board. The stress level seems to be relatively low. I typically hand mine out at the end of, say, labs. So if we cover a topic on Tuesday, odds are I've got a lab on Thursday. It's a combined lecture lab course. Beautiful thing. Or I'll have them doing group activities, and then it's like, once your group is finished, here is your assessment. Yes, it's easier for them to cheat, but I find if they're cheating, they're not doing a very good job of it if the average score is like 50 to 75% after 2 tries. So yeah, that's kind of the standard there. So try and keep it very low key, and it has worked well. The students do seem to like the approach. Obviously, if you're doing mastery grading, what I've heard from the pharmacy school was that, especially that whole, but I just missed one thing, how am I failing? That does kind of rub students the wrong way before they get used to it. So it's kind of one of the transitional periods that the pharmacy school is having issues with. And my understanding is the master grading is very big into medicine and pharmacy and pre-professional schools in general. So I've had good luck with it in the semester and a half that I've used it. Something that I encourage you to read the book, think about if it would fit your class better or not. I personally feel it works well for kind of the bottom 2/3 of Bloom's taxonomy. Once you're into synthesis and evaluation, where there's no real this is right, this is wrong answer, then it's a little bit more problematic. That's actually where I feel ungrading shines. So if you've seen my previous video on rethinking grading, another approach which is completely different, known as ungrading, where basically the student and the faculty discuss and agree upon a grade based on a portfolio of work. That works really good for high-level Bloom's taxonomy, but it's an insane amount of work. You know, if you're going to have a half-hour meeting with each student once a week and you have 100 students, have fun. There are technically enough hours in the week, but you're not sleeping if you're doing that. However, if this is a higher level course, you've got less students, you're dealing with higher level learning objectives, this is probably going to work much better. And for courses that are kind of more intermediate, you still got a lot of students, but it's not, you know, right versus wrong. Instead, what you're probably looking at is something like the EMRN grading. Okay, so with all that said, and I'm losing my lights, have a wonderful day, and I will see you in later videos.